Hi, thanks for joining us. Today we are going to be talking about some of the myths surrounding EVs and Zeros in particular, and answering some of the questions that you've sent to us through social media. To answer those questions, I'm joined today by Dale Robinson, who is Zero Motorcycles UK and Ireland Country Manager, and Matt Drew, who is from Zero dealership J&M Electrobikes. He is an all-round boffin when it comes to these things. So without further ado, Dale, you've been doing this for about 6 years now?
Yeah, a few years.
I bet you've heard a few myths in your time.
I've probably heard them all, I would have thought, Paul, at various shows and various places, wherever I've pulled up anywhere, pretty much.
What's the most common one that you hear?
Oh, crikey, I've got a few, but the most important one is that people usually say after you've had a positive conversation about electric bikes, yeah, but the infrastructure's not there. Well, do you know what? The reality is, it is there. You just don't see it. You'll see a petrol station because it's either bright green or it's bright yellow, or you know it's there. But when you're looking for an electric charging station, they're everywhere, but you just don't see them because they're not obvious to you. But there's now more charging stations. There are electric charging stations than there are petrol stations in the UK. But again, people don't get that. And the reality is when I go out to charge, I've always found a charger. I've never not found a charger. I don't go out for a ride and worry about it. I always find it. So the reality is when people say, yeah, the infrastructure isn't there. But do you know what? It is, and it's only going to get better. Not if everybody had an electric car, an electric vehicle, maybe, but you know it's evolving, and more chargers are being fitted every single day of the week.
I mean, I've done a fair few miles on electric bikes over the years, and to be honest, I charge at home most of the time. Yeah. I think that's one of the things that people often forget as well, isn't it, Matt?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, I probably charge at home, I mean, more than 90% of the time, and if I do charge out using the car charging infrastructure, it's normally just for a top up because depending on what range, what type of bike you're on, you can quite easily do over 100 miles. So a quick 20-minute top up charge at a car charging station gets you back to where you need to go, and then 3-pin plug, slow charge overnight or while you're working.
It's a different way of sort of thinking about it, isn't it? Because we're all conditioned by riding petrol bikes for all our life, so you just automatically assume I've got to go to a petrol station, but actually you get the app out, you know where they are, and it's
very easy, Paul. You know it yourself, but I mean, at the end of the day, if you're only travelling 20 miles, if you only need 20 miles, why would you stop and charge? Because one of the things that people ask all the time is, yeah, okay, but how much from flat to full? How long is it going to take to charge? And I say, well, look, you don't need to go from flat to full. If you've done 140, 150 miles on your tank and you've just got another 50 mile to go home, charge for 30 minutes. Why would you arrive home with 50% of your battery? It's just not necessary. You wouldn't fill your adventure bike up with fuel to go 20 miles. You just wouldn't do it. It's just a different way of looking at it, but it works. And top-ups is generally what the Type 2 stations are, unless you're going touring, in which case you will probably pull up with 20%.
Yeah. But no, I was actually looking at the stats of how many chargers there are versus petrol stations in the UK. So there's about 8,000 petrol stations. There's over 40,000 charging locations in the UK, with over 70,000 actual charging points. And that's spread across Type 2, DC fast charging and CHAdeMO. But it just goes to show how many opportunities there are to charge when you're out and about.
But you're not looking for them. If you're not an EV rider, you're not driving an EV. You're generally you just wash over you, don't they?
Yeah.
But Matt, you've been selling Zeros for about 2 years now, I think.
Yeah, correct.
You must hear quite a lot of myths and half-truths coming in the dealership.
Yeah, again, same as Dale, you hear them all, but one of the things that you do tend to hear is about the battery life and end of life process around the batteries. A lot of people think that they'll just go to landfill, which of course isn't the case. Possibly for lithium batteries obviously is what these EVs run on, which is the case for a lot of phones and that sort of thing. Phones tend to potentially go to landfill because it's a small item throw away. But with a big electric vehicle, these huge battery packs, they have to be dealt with responsibly. And in fact, the material used in them it's 100% recyclable. There's loads of different startups doing lots of different things with how they recycle them. Some of them are manually disassembled. I even saw a company recently, it's quite an interesting one. Mm-hmm. They have a massive bath of liquid. It's proprietary, they don't tell you what's in it. But essentially, they dunk the battery in this liquid. It completely discharges it, and then it goes through a process of being broken down fully autonomously. So you get a bucket of plastics, you get a bucket of copper and aluminium, and then you get this stuff that they call black gold, which is the lithium, the cobalt, the nickel, all of your precious metals, which then just go back around the system and get put in the next generation of lithium batteries.
They're reusable, aren't they? You extract them, and they've still got the same prowess that they had before. It's still there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the metals, precious metals, don't degrade. Yeah. It's an element. It's there. It's there's no degradation over time or overuse. So they just get recycled and back in the next battery.
I guess if nothing else, it's expensive stuff. You wouldn't be burying precious metal in landfill if you thought you could extract that out of it. So it's hard to imagine that people would be throwing away such precious elements. But yeah, is it something that you hear as well?
Well, it is, and I mean it's a big concern. I mean a battery's a big chunk of money for a start, and it's the biggest asset that your motorcycle has, in the same way that an engine would be for a petrol bike. So the fact that it can be broken down sustainably and reused is a positive when you hear some of the horror stories that people will throw at you. We're selling a motorcycle here, Paul. Yes, it's an electric motorcycle, but it's still a motorcycle. We don't play on the green credentials of the bike at all. We play on it, it's just a fun bike to ride, and that's pretty much it. But if you are going to have something that can be broken down and be put into other batteries or other applications, just think about how much oil you've taken out of your bike over the years. In 5 years, how many oil changes you've had, how many of that you've poured, how much of that particular liquid gold have you taken out of your motorcycle and poured down the drain, because that doesn't get recycled.
Yeah, we've had a few questions about the carbon footprint, let's say. Edward sent a message in saying they're only zero when you're riding, but actually manufacturing, most of your riding, and definitely not end of life. Is it something are there some figures out there that show the carbon footprint over the lifetime of the vehicle?
There is. There's been quite a few studies done for electric cars, more than motorcycles, because the market's much bigger. But yeah, there's quite a lot of interesting studies out there regarding it. Generally speaking, it's about 50% higher carbon emissions to create an electric car versus an internal combustion car. And the trouble is, when people generally do comparisons between internal combustion and electric, they'll say, okay, through the manufacturing process, you're starting much higher with your carbon emissions on an electric versus a petrol, and then over the lifespan, it's going to extrapolate over time. The trouble is, they kind of they make it look a lot more simple than it is. You take the carbon emissions from internal combustion, which is easy to calculate. We know what that is. Manufacturers have to state it. On electric, what people try to do to make it seem like there's some kind of equality between the two. Equality is probably not the right word. To show that there's some comparison between the two, is they'll say, okay, well, where does that electricity come from? In the UK, about 40% is renewable at the moment. So that's kind of a benefit in the UK. But that's as far as they go. The trouble is, if you're going to look at where the electricity comes from to power the electric vehicle, you have to look at where the fuel is coming from to power the internal combustion. And the thing is, once you start doing that, it becomes clear that electric vehicles over the course of, even 50,000 miles are way better for the environment. Like Dale says, zero motorcycles are for the passion of riding motorcycles, not necessarily looking at it from a perspective of trying to make it as green as possible. But quite an interesting study that I saw was, if you're pumping crude oil, you could run around 15,000 electric vehicles purely from how much energy it takes to pump the oil out of the ground. So if you just create energy, direct to source, put it in a vehicle, you cut out all of that carbon footprint.
It was interesting what you said there, because my next question, Melody sent us a question from you, and she said, this is mostly in capitals, by the way. She says, you don't understand what a person wants in a bike. It's all about engine power and sound. I'm looking at you, Dale. What do you think about that?
I've been riding motorcycles since I was 12, Paul. I've ridden all sorts, off-road, on-road, all around the world, various things. And yes, I'm now selling motorcycles and I'm enjoying being in that position. And it's the best job in the world, you know, being involved in motorcycles. But it's just a motorcycle. And you know, they are not silent. They're quieter. When you're pushing the bike, it makes a noise that lets you know you're pushing it, and it's making the hair stand up on my arms talking about it, because it has a certain noise that it lets you know that you're really shoving it. And it's just as exciting when you get used to that, the noise that it makes. And, you know, when you go tipping into a corner without touching the brakes, letting the regen do itself, go past the apex of the corner, then turning it and hitting the throttle, knowing that the traction control isn't going to spin up, and firing out the corner, there's nobody can tell you that that isn't fun, because it's absolutely hilarious. I'll get myself into trouble one day with it, but roundabouts are a different kettle of fish altogether. And, you know, for me, 2 strokes, 4 strokes, they've both got 2 wheels. Electric bikes, 2 wheels. They're just a motorcycle. A fun motorcycle, differently the two, of course, sound different, look different, behave different. But at the end of the day, you sling a leg over it and you've got a throttle and you have fun. You go to places, you can go to work on it, but the reality is it's just a motorcycle.
I think there's a bit of a myth, isn't there, that an electric vehicle is just a petrol vehicle, but with all the sound turned off and with no vibration. But actually, they're just so different, aren't they?
Completely different. And I think, you know, we see it regularly. You know how we work, where we go on to an event and we throw people on it. We call it bums on seats. And the reality is you will ask a lot of questions that'll be answered that you won't even know that you're going to ask when you get on the bike and say, oh my goodness, that's how it works. That's really good fun. We'll get some people at events that won't get on the bike. They don't want to try it. And I can only wonder why, and I can only assume is they're frightened to like it, because if you get off, and I've been involved in a few manufacturers, Paul, there's bikes that people will like and there's bikes that people won't like. You know, a model range, there'll be something that doesn't suit somebody. But this is a bike where everybody gets off it. And I mean everybody, and says, do you know what, that was great. I wouldn't buy one, not necessarily everybody's going to say that. But the reality is everybody enjoys it. And if the guy who doesn't want to like it doesn't get on it and does get off it and say, that was awful, he's got to be kidding, because you cannot not ride an electric bike and not think that was fun. If you love motorcycles, you'll love riding one of these. It might not be for you, but you'll certainly enjoy riding it, for sure.
Yeah, totally agree. It's the balance of the bike that gives you that fun factor as well, because the weight balance is so low down. You've got, you know, big battery, it weighs a lot, but, you know, about 80% of your weight of the bike is almost at your axle line. So that, for me, you know, electric vehicles, everyone always talks about acceleration, but the handling is actually one of the biggest standout points of riding these bikes. And, you know, like Dale says, you can thread them through some corners and take a roundabout at a ridiculous angle and give it a handful on the way out, and it is a hell of a lot of fun.
It's slingshot. It's literally slingshots you out the roundabout. It's just absolutely fantastic.
On a related note, one of the next sort of myths that we've got written down, a question that came in from quite a few people, is you can't go touring on an electric bike. Discuss. Well,
I think when I first started for Zero, that was six years ago. Crikey, you were only 12 then, Professor. And I was desperate to prove that we were much more than a commuting motorcycle. Desperate. And so me and my wife jumped on a bike called the Black Forest at the time. And we decided that, of course, we were going to go to the Black Forest, from Newcastle to the Black Forest. Why wouldn't you? And you know, I applied the rule was I was a green, as in a naive electric motorcyclist with my first experience of touring on a motorcycle, and I would ride until we had about 20% in it, equivalent to having your reserve tap on a petrol bike, and then start looking for fuel stations. Big mistake. There was, you know, we nearly lost my wife, as in her being my wife, on the tour because of my decisions. And then when I realised you stop swimming against the tide and go on an app, find your charging places on the way. And what we were doing was my wife didn't want to travel for 300 miles a day. She wanted to travel a limit of 200 miles a day. So we'd go to the hotel. We had a 20-metre extension cable that hung out the window. into the bike, woke up in the morning with 100% charge in the bike. Off we'd go. We'd do about 100 miles on this bike, stop for some lunch for an hour and a half. We'd then have a range of about 90 to 100 miles, next hotel, next plug-in. And it was easy. And we did something like, I don't know, 8 days away at the Black Forest, and we got there, and we got back to Newcastle. And we spent something like 12 quid, I think, on charging. And you know, I mean, in the first couple of days, I could feel my wife looking over my back to look at the gauge, which was saying 0%, and had set it for the last 10 minutes. And we were in the middle of nowhere. But that wasn't the bike's fault. That was my fault. I had to adjust to riding. And that was 6 years ago. So now, and that battery had 13 kilowatts of power in it. We've now got 17 kilowatts, and we've got power tanks which you can add up to 20 kilowatts. So now our ranges are getting towards 150, 160. Matt, you came up today. What, you did 100?
Yeah, I've rode in today. I've done 126 miles so far. Still 25 miles left showing on the range.
150 mile, that was on dual carriageway as well, wasn't
Pretty much all dual carriageway.
So you can do it, you've just got to plan a little bit more.
But is that the thing with myths? That sometimes myths, there's a truth, and then it grows out. Like I remember Zeros 10 years ago, you were talking about an 11 kilowatt hour battery, 1.3 kilowatt onboard chargers on them.
Then, wasn't it?
You know, and actually now you're looking at sort of 50% more battery, 50% more range, 10 times potentially the charging capability.
Yeah.
I mean, I owned a I think 2018 Zero I had. Yeah. And yeah, there was limitations to it that the current generation, you know, I've done thousands and thousands of miles touring around Scotland on them, and yeah, 104 mile stint, recharging an hour, it is a different way, as you say, but can you not tour? It's probably not the bike you'd want to ride if you're going, you know, if it's just going on the Autobahn and doing, you know, thousands of miles that way. But yeah, to tour around Wales or Scotland, I don't think there's anything better, really.
Paul, a lot of people at shows will come up and say, well, you know, I want to do 500 miles a day. And I was saying, well, it probably isn't for you. You know, you could do it, but it would take some planning to do it. But my answer is I've only got a 130 mile backside. It doesn't matter what bike I'm riding. I want to be off it after 130 miles, regardless whether it's charging, whether it's going for a cup of coffee. I don't want to sit on, I love riding motorbikes, but I don't want to sit in it for 250 miles. I want to just get off, walk, stretch my legs for half an hour, then I go away again.
It's interesting here, we got a question from Wayne who contacted us, I think through Facebook, and he said, can they do 200 miles on a single charge at -2? And when I saw that, my first thing is, I don't think I could do 200 miles at anything nowadays, you know. I think Wayne's probably in the extreme end of what he's looking for from a motorcycle, really.
Do you know, in the winter, again, just talking by experiences, the DSRX rekindled my love for riding motorcycles again. I was going through changing from riding track bikes to going back to riding motorcycles again, and shoving the track to one side and going riding motorbikes. But the DSRX came out, and that's the best bike we've ever made. It just rides fantastic. I cannot really explain why it does what it does so well. But when it arrived, I started riding again, and we were going to a Christmas party in Zero, and it was that really cold spell before Christmas in December when we were down to -8 and -9. And I decided that I wasn't ready to stop riding, so I put my heated jacket on, my heated gloves, and I went to Holland on the bike. And do you know, I know there's a 5% drop off for when you get below 3 and 4 degrees, but I didn't experience it, and it didn't make any difference because I was just doing what we usually do, is doing a top-up charge and going from there. So yes, the cold will make a difference, but you've got plenty of charging stations you just allow a 5%, you know, movement in your range and how long you're going to ride. And it was great. And you know, heated jacket didn't mark the bike at all. It didn't. Now the heated gloves didn't either. It wasn't. It was a total myth that you can't run those things at all. Otherwise, you'll get 20 mile. You know, you've got a 20 mile range. Your bike will go 20 mile an hour. It'll take 20 hours to charge. Those times are gone now. You know, long gone.
Yeah. I had my heated grips on the whole time I was.
Yeah, I noticed that when I touched them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another myth that we hear, going off tack a little bit, is quite a few people have contacted us, and I know from being at shows and stuff, people going, do I need a license? You don't need a license for one of those, do you? Is that something in the shop that you hear a lot?
I wouldn't say I hear it a lot, but I have heard it, you know, several times. People think that because it's electric, it's like an e-bike that you can pedal on and you can just ride wherever you like. Obviously, that's not the case. You do have to have, especially for zeros. You've got CBT legal, the FXE and the S, extremely good bikes and ridiculously powerful. Don't let the CBT licensing fool you, because there's so much power in those bikes. They're 450, 500 cc equivalent realistically. And then the higher end stuff where you do need a full A license to ride them. But yeah, it's an easy mistake to make if you're new to the industry.
Yeah, we get out a lot on the social, people saying, do you make a 125? And you don't really know quite how to respond to that, because you do make an A1 category bike, but it's certainly not a 125, is it?
No, it's not. And I think, we a lot of born agains, a guy who was travelling to work on the train and that's fed up with it, or going to work on the bus, but was a motorcyclist a few years ago, they'll have to come back. They can use their car licence and they've got to do a CBT. CBT, you're out on an A1 licence. And the A1 licence, a lot of times if you buy a 125, you're passing through. You're going to do your 125 test, then you're going to go on to get your full licence. If you really just want a bike to go to work on and you're tired of the normal, hustle and bustle of the commute, you can just do your CBT and you can ride a zero straight away, and it's automatically got the performance, as Matt says, of about a 400 or 500 cc bike. You're not passing through with that bike. That bike will do what you've bought it to do for years and years and years and years. Especially with all the low emission zones now starting to take a hold as well, it even makes more sense, So, yeah, you do need a license though, that's for sure.
Talking about commuting, we had a couple of questions come in. So there's a bit of a myth, I think, going around that if you ride a zero in town, you're going to be knocking over pedestrians who can't hear you because you're riding a silent motorcycle. We've had several people comment on that. Anyone got any customers who are doing that?
I don't think there's too much truth behind it. Obviously, the quieter the vehicle, the less likely people are potentially to hear you coming. But a lot of it comes down to how aware those people are of their own surroundings. I'll never cross a road unless I look properly. I don't only wait to hear something and think, oh, okay, I can't hear anything, so I'm going to step out. The only time I've ever had someone step in front of me was purely because they had headphones on and they just weren't paying attention, and that's only happened once in 3.5 years of riding electric.
And that's how legislation's going, isn't it? I mean, a Euro 5 scooter is pretty silent anyway, isn't it? I mean, that's...
You could have been driving a V8, Matt, and they probably wouldn't have heard you.
Exactly.
Because they've got their earbuds and not taking a call. And I think the other thing that if you're driving in town, Paul, or a city, because you haven't got a clutch and because you're more in tune with the riding of your bike, you're far more aware of what's going on around you as well. So generally in the olden days, when you'll be looking at a junction, trying to look into the driver's eyes to make sure that they're not going to pull out in front of you, you're far more aware of what's going on around you, and you can see the guy that's on his phone and that's got the potential for stepping up. But genuinely, crikey, I've done some miles in towns around the UK, and I've never had it happen to me once. Not once. Genuinely, that's never happened to me. So I'm sure it's happened to some people, but it certainly hasn't happened to me, and it's not a problem that I've ever experienced.
Matt, so I'm going to ask you this because I know you're a trained engineer and you've worked around industrial engineering for a long time and stuff. And a question that, and I'm sure you've heard it as well, Dale, is people going, I'm going to wait for hydrogen to come along. Hydrogen is hallelujah, the solution to everything. From what I see, I hear arguments for and against, but I'm not sure. What's your understanding?
Yeah, so hydrogen as a solution for EV technology now can look quite like it's got good potential. If you're looking at energy density for electric vehicles and current charge times, then if someone came along and said, oh, well, you could just have hydrogen that replaces your petrol and you've got 1,000 miles of range, it's, well, okay, well, yeah, hydrogen sounds like it's the way to go. The things with hydrogen, I mean, firstly, it's very difficult to extract. It's kind of what you call a sticky atom. So it doesn't like to be taken away from the other atoms that it's connected to. So it takes a lot of energy just to do that part of the process. And then there's two kinds of propulsion for hydrogen. You've got hydrogen combustion, which is just like a traditional internal combustion engine, just uses hydrogen. Or you've got hydrogen electric, where you have a hydrogen fuel cell, which then feeds electricity into essentially an EV platform. again, when we're going back to looking at comparison between the two, the energy used to go from not having any hydrogen to having something that can go in a vehicle versus generating electricity to go into a vehicle, EVs are always the more efficient way to do things. Rather than putting all that energy into creating the other fuel, just put it straight into the vehicle. It makes way more sense. I think hydrogen is probably going to be used more for long distance haulage or for aerospace, because that kind of thing fits better to have fuel cells or that sort of thing where they can do many, many more miles. But again, that's a current technology issue. I don't think it's ridiculous to say that at some point we're going to have batteries that have an energy density that allows 1,000 miles of range and recharges in a couple of minutes. It's, that curve, the technology curve, I think will allow that, and electric just seems to be the best way to do it.
And in a lot of cases, hydrogen is effectively powering an electric motor anyway, isn't it? It's not like hydrogen is a replacement for petrol, for gasoline. It's generating the electricity, isn't it, to power. So actually, if your argument is you want to maintain the feel of an internal combustion engine, hydrogen cells aren't doing that, are they?
No, not the fuel cells. No. I know there's companies like Toyota that are developing internal combustion hydrogen vehicles, but again, it's more of a technology development thing rather than a realistic, this is actually what we're going to use in future. So yeah, hydrogen fuel cell, into an EV drivetrain is how that's best used. But like I say, the battery technology is developing so quick that it'll outpace the hydrogen requirement in the not too distant future.
Dale, one of the myths that we hear, one of the things that we get coming in a lot on social media is things like, charging. What happens when I live in a flat, or can I charge my bike in X, Y, or Z conditions? Is charging still a big thing for people who are not turned on to EVs yet?
It's not been solved yet, Paul, being completely honest with you, although there are a lot of streetlights being converted to chargers in streets these days. So if you're going to leave your bike outside your house, I don't know if I'd leave my £20,000 motorcycle outside my house unless it had a major lock on it. But it's the same problem for the petrol as it is for the EV. You're just going to have to do your charging before you get there. And if you charge enough to get to your place of work, if the savvy people, if they're travelling to commute, will charge at work, where they can charge for free, and then the cost of travel to work are much better. But it is a tough one, and we don't have swappable batteries. It's the same as trying to take an engine out of a bike. It'll take the same amount of time to get a battery out. You'll know. Yeah. And so we used to have swappable batteries, Paul, in some of our early bikes, but they just didn't sell. They didn't sell. They were a great concept for situations such as this, but even then, crikey, it was quite a way to be carrying up the stairs or up the elevator, whatever the story is. But I think you're not going to chuck a long extension out of the top floor flat down to the bottom and leave it there. It's still not a solvable issue, but in terms of the charging places in the city are becoming more plentiful and closer to your house. So you do your charging there, then take your bike to your house. Really, I think is get an hour's worth of charging, and then you're generally all right. That's how I would say. Would you be the same way? Or?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Always, if you can charge at home, charge at home. Yeah. I say I'll commute to work and charge at work as well. Why not? If you can, take advantage of any opportunity to slow charge. Again, talking about myths and things that we hear that might not necessarily be true anymore is people saying about the battery degradation and how quickly that happens. Well, the more often you slow charge off a 3-pin plug, the better battery life you're going to have over the full lifespan of that battery.
I mean, there's been a few questions we got in, which I think probably all spin around the same axis. One being, Zero's got a 5-year battery warranty, and there's a bit of a myth that 5 years and 1 week later, and
it's done.
It's done. There's questions around DC charging, which we've had a few people ask questions about that, about the degradation of battery. And Zero's been around long enough. There's been enough EVs on the road to kind of have data. I mean, what's your understanding about the lifespan of a battery?
Well, I mean, generally speaking, it's not as bad as people think it is. We can take the car industry as a better example of this at the moment, because the electric cars have been around a lot longer. So, for example, my 2015 Renault Zoe, it's over 8 years old now. That will still do exactly the same miles that manufacturer quoted when it was brand new. So over those 8 years, it's basically seen no loss of range in that time. To the point where Renault were doing the battery lease. I bought out my battery lease because I don't need it. The battery's been going this long. It's still strong. So we can assume that the same is for the motorbikes. Obviously, Dale, you've been riding some bikes that are quite a good number of years old now.
Well, I think we've been at it now since 2006, but 2010 in mass production. So we're now up to 14, 15 years of total production, and some of the tests that we're doing on 6 and 7 year old motorcycles, the batteries have got way over like 94, 95%. So we're starting to see that coming through fairly strong. But in terms of the warranty, Paul, that you mentioned, 5 years is a long time to say, I'll guarantee your battery's going to be okay for 5 years. The reality is that there is no mileage limitation on that. That's unlimited mileage. And we think that the battery's going to last 220,000 miles. 220,000 miles. I'll not do 220,000 miles. But again, people assume when they see 5 year battery warranty, it must be going to stop at 5 years. Well, it doesn't. And it's just us being over generous to try and compensate for people who are worried about a power source. And life is changing so fast these days, isn't it? Everything is changing at a pace. And the battery has a number of cells. Is it 116 cells in the batteries? So there are 116 cells in there. And you can imagine that in the future, as petrol dissipates and slows down, that there will be some companies that specialize in rebuilding batteries. If it goes wrong, it's usually a manufacturing defect, in the very few that we've had go wrong, and it's 1 or 2 cells. So 1 or 2 cells out of 116. You don't throw your petrol engine away if you need piston rings. You repair it. The same thing will happen with batteries too. But we're moving at such a pace, but the reality is you haven't got to worry about it anyway, because we're saying we'll give you a 5 years warranty. 220,000 miles is what you'll get out of that. And we've got some bikes that are well over 100,000 miles and they've still got the full range in their battery.
There is that. I think, again, it's that thing where many years ago there were myths going around. So Renault did the lease thing, and everyone really ramped their warranties up just as a sort of belt and braces. But now you're seeing Tesla's, the batteries are outlasting the vehicle in a lot of cases, aren't they? I mean, they're doing massive miles. And
I think there's an early Tesla out there now with over 500,000 miles on it.
Yeah, exactly. So there's no moving parts in it like there is
and you look after it, Paul. You in the same way that if you had a petrol motor, I would always want to switch it on and let it tick over before and let the oil circulate and get it warm before you go. Matt mentioned about slow charging. Slow charging is the best way to do it rather than force fed. You've got to force feed sometimes when you want to go somewhere, but if you look after your battery, you will get the benefits from it, no doubt.
And Zero's warranty compared to other electric manufacturers is, I think, probably at the forefront.
Well, it is. It's 2 years for the bike and 5 years for the battery, but that's only there. It's got nothing to do with end of life. It's all there to give you confidence that, look, you've got nothing to worry about. Just buy your bike, enjoy it for what it is. Don't be worrying about your battery, because there genuinely is nothing to worry about, for sure.
So, continuing on the charging front, quite a few people, it's not so much a myth as a question around DC charging, so direct charging versus AC, alternating current charging, which is what Zero use. Yep. And what the majority of public chargers are, it's what you use at home. Mm-hmm. Zero's always gone down the AC route. Can we maybe explain to the people who are asking that question what that means? Yeah,
well, so there's a very good reason why Zero are kind of sticking to their guns with the AC side of things. That's mainly because of the number of chargers and the location of those types of chargers. DC charging's brilliant. You can chuck a whole lot of energy into a battery really, really quickly. But you generally find those on main highway points, motorway services, and that kind of place. Which realistically, I hate going on the motorway. I don't know about you, but I don't want to go on a motorway anyway. And those chargers quite often are stacked with people waiting to charge anyway. The reason why Type 2 is a good system to stick with is that they're absolutely everywhere all around the country. You'll find them in pub car parks, at cafes, at points of interest. Anywhere where you're going that's kind of a more interesting ride, B roads, country roads, that sort of thing, that's where you're more likely to find your Type 2 AC chargers. So at this point in time, there doesn't really seem to be much of a need for DC charging. There's about 4 or 5 times more Type 2 AC chargers than there are DC in the UK. So again, your opportunity to charge is so much greater.
I know when I was up in Scotland last month, I did about sort of 500 miles over a couple of days, and every village had at least 2, normally more, AC charging points.
People don't expect it in Scotland, Paul, do they? You talk to people and say there'll be no chargers up there. And
the structure's great, but if you only relied on AC, you'd really be struggling. But actually, there's loads of them, and you can charge your bike. I had DSRX with a quick charger fitted. So it's like, even if you got down low, it's less than an hour to charge on a 3-phase charger. But actually, the amount of chargers that are out there for zero is pretty big, and I imagine it's better for the battery health as well.
It's definitely better, yeah. Like we said before, the faster you charge, the more heat's generated, and it's the heat that does the damage to the cells. So the slower you can charge, the better, and the longer your battery will last.
Just a bit of a trade-off, I guess, between speed and I know when I had my first zero, it was like 1.3. You literally did have to leave it overnight to charge, and now it's like an hour. It's amazing.
And the last 5%, I think, is where the cells are balancing themselves. So that takes disproportionately more time to get that last 5%. But if you're going somewhere, you don't need to have it. You can just pull it out at 95 and go. But when you get home, you leave it to go to 100%. It doesn't matter. You're in bed. It doesn't matter. And if you can set the bike to actually charge through the night and use our economy 7 at buttons, and again, you couldn't do that with a DC charger. So you're waking up in the morning with a full tank of petrol already in your bike in the morning. Otherwise, you're going to have if you had a petrol bike, you have a load of jerry cans in your garage to reach the same point.
So Dale, I've seen you at loads of bike shows like Motorcycle Live. You're speaking to people all day. I bet you get some people coming up to you with some mad ideas on how they're going to solve the whole thing of perpetual charging and charge while you ride.
The maddest one wasn't at a show, actually. I was in a bar. And it was I was lucky enough to go to the factory in Santa Cruz, and we were there with our zero shirts on in the bar, and this guy come up to me. He says, "So I've got something you want to know." I said, "What's that?" He says, "I've cracked it." I said, "What?" He said, "I've cracked perpetual motion." He says, "Yeah." He says, "You know those cars, when you toy cars that you pull them back like that, and then you let it go, it just goes." He says, "Yeah." He says, "That's it." So what? Put a spring in a bike? He said, "Yeah, but release the power gently." I said, "So what, you just got to pull it back and go?" I said, that was the maddest perpetual motion that I've ever heard. But the reality is that we do have a generator on the bike. Every bike comes with a generator, and it's the motor. The motor, for simplistic terms, turns into a generator when you're off the throttle and the wheel's spinning. It's putting power back into the battery. And it depends, you cannot put more back in than you took out. It's just, all about physics. But the reality is, it's doing that. So if you're on and off the throttle, your range is extended. Opposite to a petrol bike where you want to keep the throttle constant and you're more efficient on the motorways. We're more inefficient on the motorways because we're not getting any throttle movement at all. We're getting no regeneration, no recovery of energy at all. So it's the opposite, but yeah, you do get some stories.
But Matt, I wouldn't be completely mad if I said, well, why don't you put some solar panels on the top box or carry our generator around with you? I'm not totally mad by saying that, am I?
Sounds good.
Well, I mean, you could do that, and you could probably charge your phone while you're riding. But I think the efficiency of the solar panels isn't going to be enough to be able to put that much energy back in. You'll be wanting to put at least what you take out, or if not more, which solar panels just aren't that efficient at the moment.
I mean, I suppose I'm jesting a little bit, but it is a huge battery, and but we do hear, I've heard people, and comes on our Facebook channel and stuff quite a lot. You get people saying, could I add some solar panels to the bike? Could I put a generator in there and then I can charge while I'm riding, that sort of thing? It's not really an option, is it?
It's not that simple.
No. But again, technology develops, so maybe in 15, 20 years time we'll have solar panels that are powerful enough to do that, and I'm sure Zero will jump on that kind of technology as and when it's available. But certainly at the point that we're recording this, it's not.
Maybe sometime in the future.
Yeah.
But I guess, joking aside, if you've got solar panels at home, it's all part of the chain, isn't
Absolutely.
it? And if you want to be...
And your battery's an energy store, Paul, so if you have got solar panels at home, it doesn't matter how long your bike's sitting there, but your bike can be there being charged if you're not using it. It's an energy store like anything else, so as long as you've got the time to do it, it doesn't matter whether it's a 1 kilowatt solar panel or not. It'll be 17 hours to charge your bike, but it doesn't matter if you're not using it. It's for free.
So guys, we're going to have to wrap up. Thank you very much for your time. There's a couple of quick fire things just to cover everything off. One question we got is around if bike's involved in an accident, is it safe? What happens to the battery in that instance? Is that something we've got any experience of?
It's no different to a petrol bike. If you have a bad accident, you have which nobody wants to have, a sideways shunt. That's the only time that a battery could be broken. Most times the battery is really well insulated in the frame, and because of the way that it's constructed and the way that it's situated in the frame, it's not going to hit the deck. It's going to be a pretty catastrophic accident, which if it was a petrol bike, it would break the motor as well, probably. Hopefully this never happens to anybody. But in terms of it going into flames when in an accident, unlikely. Never known it happen. And we've had a few accidents, myself included, and I've never been anywhere near damaging the battery. I've broke handlebars, I've done various other things, but I've never even touched the battery. And dropping it isn't going to, there's no acid in there anymore. The days of using paint off your frame or the chrome off your exhaust because your battery breather's just dripped all over your beautiful chrome pipes is gone. This is not it's a lithium ion battery which has got pouches in. It doesn't drip acid anywhere. So it's just different, Paul, and no, I think they're just as safe as ice bikes are.
Yep, 100%. We had a customer who got knocked off his bike, unfortunately, at about 60 miles an hour or so, on a dual carriageway. Wow. The frame took all of the impact, obviously got written off, but we're turning it into a track bike now, so
So positive from a negative.
Exactly.
I think that's the thing. Is a lot of myths are, I think if you compare an EV, a Zero from 15 years ago to what it is today, it's just not comparable, is it? So I think the takeaway that I get is people just got to be open-minded, try the bikes out. And I think when you try the bikes out, the more you ride them, the more you understand it's just another way of enjoying motorcycling, really, isn't it?
Nobody's forcing anybody to that route, Paul. I think that's a point that's made by one of the people that wrote in, that there's nobody forcing anybody to ride motorcycles. You ride a motorcycle because you want to ride a motorcycle. And, at some point, I'm pretty sure there'll be a point where petrol motorcycles, just like petrol cars, will be outlawed at some point. But you can still ride your petrol car in 2031. You can still drive your diesel, although I'm sure there'll be tax restrictions, but it's just a motorcycle. Yeah. And nobody's forcing you to ride it. If you want to have fun, then you'll have fun on one of these. But you'll also have fun on a petrol bike. But not everybody's the same, thankfully. So you make your choice, but the only way you'll know is by getting sat on the bike, turn the key in the ignition and go for a ride. And hopefully we'll be an event near wherever anybody is that's watching this in the next 12 months, and please come and see us and go for a ride.
Yeah, people are buying Zeros because they want to buy Zeros, not because anyone's making them buy a Zero. And obviously at J&M, one of the most successful...
We don't force people to come to the showroom. We're not kidnapping them out of the streets.
That would be bad, that would be bad.
No, but that's the thing. People come of their own volition, and if they want to come and demo an electric motorbike, then they'll come to us and they'll take one out for a ride. And if they like it enough, they might just buy one. It's completely their choice. We get some people who are coming off a petrol bike to go exclusively onto electric. We get some people who have a collection of bikes that just want to add another variant of a motorcycle to their garage. It doesn't really matter. It's their choice, and all we can say is they're extremely good bikes to ride. You just got to try one.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. We hope that answered your questions. We hope you find it interesting. Keep following us on our social media channels. Until next time, thanks, Dale and Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you.